Hey everyone, I had so much fun recording this, I just couldn't bear to cut anything, so you're getting it raw and unedited. So have fun with it. Welcome back to CreatorZAnon. I'm your host, James, and before we get to our special guests, please listen to the short trailer of some friends that we support.
You wake up startled in the middle of the night, convinced that there's something out there in the darkness. Your brain tells you that there's nothing to be afraid of, that the inhuman shape in the corner of your room is just your laundry piled on a chair. But as you hear the ghostly, ragged breathing that doesn't belong to you, you realize your brain is dead wrong. If you love the mix of horror, mystery, and comedy in shows like Buffy, Ash vs. the Evil Dead, or Supernatural, you'll feel right at home on The Crit Show, a Monster of the Week actual play podcast where the players, playing as themselves, are tasked with being the last line of defense from the forces of evil that go bump in the night. Join us every Wednesday and learn the games we play while the gang tries their best to solve the mysteries, hunt the monsters, and protect the innocent. Their intentions are good. Their dice rolls, not so much. You can find The Crit Show at thecritshowpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thank you for listening and catching up with some friends of ours. On our show today, we have two amazing people. We have Chip and Eddie from the great show Sage and Savant, and if I'm correct, you guys would know them as Erasmus and Petronella.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how are you guys doing? How is your Thursday?
Things are going very well for us. We're very creative people, so we always have a million things going at one time. So Chip has been composing.
A million and one.
Yeah.
It's always, yes.
Chip has been composing for a new super secret project that will be upcoming. It's not our project, it's a friend of ours project. But he's doing the music for that. And I am currently writing 3 books. I'm on contract for a Write for Hire novel about the last woman who was tried for witchcraft in Britain. That was during World War II. And I'm also, we're in edits for the second book of the Sage and Savant quadrilogy, and I'm writing book 3 of that quadrilogy just now. So yeah, we're busy.
We're busy.
Always.
And she doesn't even mention the fact that she's also integral in the Writers Guild of America as they try to figure out what to do with podcast writers, because they're wanting to bring podcast writers into the fold. And you're Creators Anonymous. So here we are talking with other creators, or other creators are listening to this. This is a really monumental time, because the rest of the world is beginning to go, wow, podcasts these are
cool.
real.
They're awesome.
And we need to figure out how they fit into the fold. Film has said, okay, this is the way film is done, and this is what we do with writers, and this is what we do with directors, and this is what we do with producers. TV is the same, radio is the same. They've had enough time to do that, but podcasts are so new that it's really people are trying to figure out where it fits, and the Writers Guild of America is trying to go, hey, we're a guild of writers. We want to make sure that writers are taken care of.
Yeah. I've experienced the other side of it, because I'm no fool. I've been watching news and everything, and when I seen AOC and Nancy Pelosi attacking podcasters, saying it's just a den for toxic ideas and we need to regulate these, and I'm like, what podcast are you listening to?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the things that we as creators need to be thinking about. And part of the reason for the WGA Audio Alliance is to say that using the umbrella term podcast is it's a misnomer. It's like saying that libraries are places for books. Yeah, sure, you can get books in libraries, but you can also get digital media of all kinds. You can also connect to the internet. You can
It's
also
a great
have,
information resource for looking up things.
So over the last 20 years, libraries have really attempted to expand their messaging that people know that there's more than books at libraries. Well, in podcasts, we need to better our messaging, because I think the general impression out there is that, Joe Rogan is podcasts. The big personality talking head thing is that, and that when that personality is toxic, then yes, there's a toxic audience. But that's only a portion of podcasts. Podcasts are also, investigative journalism. Podcasts are also creators' resources like your own. Podcasts are also audio fiction and audio drama that's doing some of the most cutting edge and wonderful stuff.
And
podcasts are also, D&D, actual play. There's a lot under that umbrella. And yes, maybe we should look at toxic presenters and toxic audiences, but you can't throw stones on everybody.
Yeah. Well, there's the whole argument that podcasts are the truest form of freedom of speech, and because they're not regulated. And if you're going to regulate a podcast, then you got to regulate the internet. And there's a whole argument behind it, but I don't want to get into that. But I do want to get into. I do want to get into Chip, your super secret project. It's not the super secret project that Sarah from Right Now just dropped onto my podcast last week, is it?
No, it's not.
I was just like, because if that's super secret, it's not secret no more.
No. This one, the creator is looking at next autumn for early announcements.
And
so yeah, we are
coming from the world of graphic novels and comics, and that's kind of all we can say.
Yeah. Kind of getting back to the previous topic and the idea of things, and tying it with Sage and Savant. Sage and Savant, we did Sage and Savant all wrong in terms of many things. So when we first started, we didn't have a trailer, we didn't have an audience, we just kind of went, we want to do a podcast.
We had one script.
And we had one script and kind of went, we want to do this. And we had a convention that we were going to, a steampunk convention that we were going to, that we were like going, this would be a great time to launch this. Well, this is 3 months before the conference. We're like going, okay, let's do this. So let's write a script. Okay, we need to find somebody at the conference that can do the narrator role. And it's like, we've got the narrator role. And then we do it at the conference. And then it's like 5 days later, we had to turn around that into that first episode. And yes, we found a friend who was willing to do the narrator part, who wasn't at the conference, so that the narrator was the conference. It just
Creator 101, good advice. Have somebody in your writing group with a really mellifluous voice. Justin his voice was just so perfect. And he was in my writers group, and I went, Justin, would you want to do a thing? He had no idea what he was volunteering for.
It's the kind of thing, and I say all of this because when we started Sage and Savant, it was really, we had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea the podcast world. I mean, we had been listening to podcasts. We certainly, we'd been listening to some podcasts, but we hadn't really explored the podcast world. So
from the production standpoint.
So it was 6 months before we were going, we really need to get the word out. We need to do this. Now, at the 5-6 month mark, at the 5-6 episode point, we see our numbers all of a sudden begin
that's
to
when the
blossom.
fans picked it up and began. We could tell when people started talking to each other and sharing our show, and it was a remarkable thing.
And in terms of creators,
I was one of your first followers on Twitter, and that's how I found out about you guys, and that's how awesome. Then I seen you guys in the Cast Junkie Discord, and then it kind of blew up from there, and I was like, holy crap, now they're exploding. Like, it's pretty good.
Yeah, and it's the thing is, again, speaking to other creators, that's such an important thing that we've done, particularly in the last 2 years, has been really advocates of if you want to do a podcast, let's talk to you about what some of the things that you should be doing before you press record, before you post online. They're just, great. You want to start a podcast? Awesome. More power to you.
So yes, we've learned from our mistakes, but I also have to say one of the things that was wonderful about the way we did Sage and Savant was it gave us time to find our feet. And I feel, as a writer, I feel the first glimmer of me finding my feet was in that third episode, where they go to the 20s and it's the chauffeur and
still one of my favorite episodes. Yeah.
And the zipper is discovered. And that is where I began to really understand the dynamic between Petronella and Erasmus. And then also the possibilities that would cause a scientist's mind to go, this leads to that, which leads to this, which leads to that, which leads to this, which became an ongoing theme through all of Sage and Savant. And starting so small and starting so ridiculously backwards meant that I didn't have immediate audience expectations. So, Sarah Warner with Girl in Space, and she's one of my favorite creators, but she has set herself such a high bar now.
She deserves that high bar, though.
Yeah, she does. Yes. Oh, yes, she absolutely does. But it also means, from a writerly standpoint, I can feel the pressure that she feels, which means that she has to produce something at a certain level. She can't flail and find her way in the same way that this first project allowed her to do, the way my first project allowed me to do. And so, boy, I hope that everything comes through for her, and the super secret everything just continues the way, that upward trajectory for her. And I hope the same for us too. It's just, it's a little nostalgia for the good old days when we didn't know what we were doing.
Sarah was on the show last week and she dropped a big bomb. And so definitely stay tuned for that episode because, But let's get into Sage and Savant. So a lot of people don't really know. Well, if you're listening to this, you probably do know what Sage and Savant is. But for those who don't, can you explain what Sage and Savant is?
Sage and Savant is my feminist retaliation against the mad scientist trope. Men are mad scientists and can be either evil or not. Dr. Frankenstein was not an evil doctor. He was just an obsessed doctor who took things too far. Dr. Jekyll was not evil. He was just obsessed and went off the rails. Yes, correct. Exactly. And this is the point. But when I went looking for female mad scientists across all of literature, 9 times out of 10, they started as evil. And that made me a little salty. I wanted to have a female mad scientist who was trying to do something good and just went too far down the rabbit hole.
However, you should also tell him the whole reason that you wrote the original story was for a series of dreams.
I am a very cliched person. I often dream my stories before I write them. And I dream very vividly and unfortunately very gymnastically for Chip. So he has more than once woken up with a busted lip or a sore kidney because I punched him, or because I
shove me out of bed.
I shove him out of bed relatively regularly. So I dream very viscerally.
I can sympathize. My wife is exactly the same way.
So I had this dream, and it was every night for about a week. I was dressed as a Victorian female scientist, as you've seen pictures of Marie Curie or any of the females of the turn of the century in the full long skirts, the kind of big poofy hair, the aprons. And I was electrocuting myself. And every night I would begin in the lab with the galvanist equipment, and I would have this determined focus, and the dream would end with me electrocuting myself. Now, they say you don't die in dreams, but I do regularly. So that says something about me. But so does a podcast where I kill my characters every single month say something about me too. So, but the thing is, after a week of Chip being pummeled as I came awake, gasping from having been electrocuted, and he said, will you just sit down and write to figure out why you're dreaming this? And it was the right thing to do. I sat down to write, and that first scene of her setting up the galvanization with the dead body, where she's attempting to make the arm move, and Erasmus coming in and tumbling the alembic, which started the whole thing, that kind of grew out of my dream as I tried to write why this would happen. Why would somebody do that? And the answer was because they needed to know what happened. You know, that's always my answer for everything. They need to know what happened. What happened next?
In the course, we have this mad scientist female who's very determined, who is doing something in her mind is very altruistic. She's wanting to create a way to produce limb reattachment. And to understand, to put some historical preference, because there's a lot of history in our show as well. We had visited just prior to our show going, we had visited Edinburgh, and Edinburgh's medical, or the University of Edinburgh has this wonderful medical museum in which they talk about all the medical advances over the last 400 years. And one of the things that was shocking was the fact that the British government actually went to war in the latter part of the 1800s to further advance medical studies. There were other reasons for that. I don't want to put the whole onus
in the pro list for war. You know, and you have pros and cons. Do we attack? Do we not? The pro was it'll advance our medical science.
And there were a number of medical doctors who were going, we need you to go to war because this is where we make these advances.
It gives us a plethora of dead bodies to experiment on, frankly.
And the number one thing that soldiers were coming back in those early wars and in World War I was disfigurement, was the loss of limb, the loss of functionality, and it was a real drain on society. So here is a scientist who's going, I need to do something to solve this problem. And galvanism was a definite something that they were doing. There was a lot of study in there. They understood that the body has electrics that go through it, and that the muscles respond to this electricity. So through all of this, and I'm saying this because for those who haven't listened to Sage and Savant, there's a lot of science. There's a lot of history that's involved in this whole process as we're thinking. And so we have the scientist who's going, I want to do this, but then going too far and discovering time travel in that. Now, there's another piece, James, that we're gonna step to. Go. They didn't understand quantum physics back in the 1800s, late 1800s. No, they did not. But in current thinking, and understand that when you're writing a show, you're writing a fiction today, although you may set it in the 1800s and you want it to sound like people from the 1800s, you aren't writing for an 1800s audience. You're writing for a 21st century audience. So by virtue of that, we're taking some of the thinking, some of the things that we know today. And one of the interesting studies that we had found is that they're currently thinking that thoughts don't actually exist in the brain. Memories exist in the brain, but thoughts don't. And the way they say that is that they can, a part of the brain can be damaged, and they can train another part of the brain to do that same functionality.
I think the better way to describe it is that the modern thinking in neuroscience is that the brain creates an atmosphere whereby thoughts and memories can occur. So the brain is literally the atmosphere for our thoughts and our memories, but it is not the containment unit for our thoughts and our memories.
So let's go to quantum physics and saying, okay, we now know that we can transport an object, or that we can bind two objects through quantum entanglement. So let's say two objects are entangled, and the objects that the environment that is in this head having thought, and then there's another head somewhere else that has entangled with those thoughts, and we are able to
same environment.
Environment. So if you can strip the thoughts from this head and cross the wire, you can entangle them, and that's kind of the science behind.
So not to give anybody heebie-jeebies, but I read 1 million scholarly papers off of JSTOR that are in current neuroscience, and a lot of stuff that I wrote there is
really creepy.
It's really creepy, but also really cool.
So the gamer in me is sitting here going, so Assassin's Creed could be real, because the whole basis of that is a guy goes into a machine, they access his DNA, and how it is thoughts and memories are actually carried along through the DNA of our ancestry. So if you want to access those thoughts and memories, you just have to break down the DNA sequence to find those exact memories.
Yes,
You're basically just saying is, I don't have to do that. I can just reconnect with a consciousness anywhere on the, like, time is not a film strip anymore. Time is a poster board of freaking dreams on the whole thing. So
time is the primordial soup that we're swimming in.
Mm-hmm.
And
you were literally the Charlie meme going, I need answers.
Well, and that a lot of the writing in Sage and Savant was driven by exactly that. I need answers. So I would read a paper and it would drag me down a rabbit hole. And then I would do that. And one of the things that the novels are allowing me to do is further investigation into why the specific lives and bodies that they went into, why did those work? And it's all kind of a formatting around that atmosphere that the brains create.
Now, and again, on the other things, and one of the comments that happens in the early Star Trek, one of the complaints that people had is, how do they talk with all of these other life forms? I mean, what's it? And correct, the communicator has his translator, but in the early shows, the first season, they didn't have that thought. There was no one who has that question. Out loud, yeah. So it's the thing is they backtrack and went, oh, it's his thinking. So in that same thought, we were actually going, wait a minute, if we're traveling to different bodies, what happens to, how do you think, how do you talk, how do you act, how do you function? Well, we know, again, through physical science, that the body has certain memories, that the body has just muscle memory, that a dancer knows how to dance. The brain may go, I don't remember that, but the muscles themselves are aware of that. So there's this wonderful episode, it's 207, where we go into the jazz. We go into the jazz club, and all of a sudden Erasmus is being forced to play piano and sing on stage. A wonderful episode for me because it gets to shine off some of my jazz music that I get to share, which I love. But it's also that opportunity to explore of, the body already knows it. It's just Savant who
gets his head out of the way.
Yeah, he has to get out. He has to get his thoughts out of the way, saying, I can't do this. And I think that also a real expression to all of those other creators out there. If you can get your head out of the way of the I can't do that, you'd be surprised at how many things you can do.
See, my big problem is I am a person that catches on to little nuances and analyzes. So whenever I sit down and I try to write, because one of the things I love doing is I love writing campaigns for any type of TTRPG. I'm currently writing a Star Wars one. So my little nuances is like, okay, what happens to the bodies after you guys transmigrate out of them? Because time and time again, you guys get treated. Like, you went into a freaking body that died of carbon monoxide poisoning. You guys cough it out and everything, and you get treated, and then you keep going on. So when you transmigrate out, does the body just crumble down dead? And I'm sitting here going, no, that they basically just jump started that body. So once they transmigrate out, why would that body die again?
I have an answer for you. It doesn't always, but bodies cannot live without consciousnesses. So the vast majority of the time when there's no consciousness installed, then it's sudden death. Then it's the sort of thing we hear about that, with old people that are in great health and for no reason they just die. My grandmother was one of those who literally turned her head to the wall. She told everyone she was dying, turned her head to the wall and died. And there was nothing physically wrong with her. And so we know that bodies do not continue when the consciousnesses do not occupy. Now, just to trigger that little, conspiracy theory brain of yours, some of those bodies get another consciousness in them. That's part of the expanded universe that is being explored in the books.
See, I was sitting here thinking maybe the original conscious just went into a coma and you walked in at the time where they're just taking a nap, and then when you leave, that is their alarm clock and they turn right back on.
There is certainly an exploration of this with Claude Duval, whose consciousness is subverted for when Petronella is there. Yeah. But there's also the exploration, and I don't remember the episode that it was, but it's where we were riding camels in the California desert and the Fort Tejon.
Season 2, but I don't remember.
I want to say episode 2 or 3. Anyway, somewhere in there, we're in the California desert, and one of the things that happens is the comment that the bodies just collapsed. And it was frustrating because Savant was right there in the middle of going, but we were right in the middle of, and so that you have both examples in the show of what happens after. You also have the exploration of Petronella, or is it Savant? One of them wanting to go and see what happens with a circus. Yeah, but then deciding, no, we can't go back because that would be isn't us. They wouldn't remember us because we were these other people. Interesting.
So that kind of bleeds into my little Eddie conspiracy theory. I really think Petra died on the operating table to get the copper wire out of her head, but I think that using transmigration, Petra learned, I think it was the beginning of season 4 or 3. Petra learned she was doing all those transmigrations by herself, and I think she learned that she actually died on the operating table. So she, in one of those cylinders, she went to the exact moment she died and jump-started her own brain back into recovery.
Interesting.
So I really think she saved her own life, and that's why she was like, no, we can go back and we can save, I forget her name, her friend that died in the fire.
Abigail.
Abigail, yes. That's why she was so adamant, and I was just like, because she already did it to herself.
So that's a book spoiler.
So can't confirm or deny, go read the book.
Cannot confirm or deny. One of the things that I discovered as I got into this story was I had written a world that was too sprawling to be contained within the confines of the audio drama. I mean, I could have continued another, and expanded and done probably another 6, 7, or 8 series episodes in the audio drama. But even that still, there's a lot of stuff that was happening interior to Petra's head that is just difficult to portray in an exterior medium like either film or audio is. And so that's where it came into writing the books, to kind of expand some of that information. And it'll be for the diehards, for the people who really want to know all of that behind the scenes and what happened. So in book 2, we get to go into all those trips that Petra takes.
So I definitely want you guys to do an audiobook of this, because I just don't have time to sit down and read anymore because of my new job.
Yes.
So audiobooks, please.
Yes, there will be audiobooks of all 4 books, so that those of our audio fans will be able to continue to follow along in the format they're most comfortable with. So yes, that's
Right.
that was my decision.
One of my questions was going to be for you: could using transmigration, could somebody transfer their consciousness into another body at the same exact time frame? Like, they know they're dying. Let's say they're dying of an incurable disease. They know it's coming. So this other person had died, lived their life. They were just very young. Could they transfer their consciousness and live permanently in that body, kind of like Professor X did at the end of the X-Men movies?
There definitely, I feel, is that
Cunningham.
Possibility
is a great example. Although it isn't the same time, it's going into a previous time. But there's the example of Cunningham going into a body and living out a life in a separate consciousness. There's also the example of Petronella and Erasmus going into or going to bodies and meeting Tesla. That's a consistent time. That's a contemporary time frame. They also go into bodies. I mean, not to do a spoiler, but in the 4th season, at the very end of the season, they go into bodies that are contemporary. It's 4 years earlier, but it is that kind of thing of going. So all of these kind of scenarios are touched on. I don't think they're explored to their fullest, but
I believe at the heart of every scientific inquiry is an ethical one. And I believe that Petra definitely lost her ethics through part of the show as she followed inquiry only. And in that case, Erasmus serves as her conscience. He's her Jiminy Cricket, to call her back to herself and help her realize that, unfettered discovery is not necessarily good. And one of the things that I love when I engage with media is when they leave me with questions that make me question my own ethics and ideas. And what I really want listeners to take away from that question is it ethical to transfer consciousness? And because I do believe, I'm a firm believer that eventually, yes, either we're going to create machines that are capable of creating the right atmosphere so that we can upload our consciousness, or we're going to have some sort of ability to move consciousness from body to body. But is it ethical to do so?
Depends on the body. So if I'm mega rich and I clone myself and that body has no consciousness, I don't see a problem with me transferring my consciousness into a body I built from the ground up using my own DNA.
So money equals good ethics?
I think process and
but that is,
I think
that is part of the consideration. I think it's the ethics around what is the human lifetime? What is it meant to be? What is it ethical to be? And one of the books that, if you haven't found the series, I think that deals with this very well, is Neil Shusterman's Scythe series, which is set in a world where we've conquered death, where no one dies. But the problem is that when no one dies, the population continues to explode. There's, limited resources. So eventually they end up creating reapers who kill a certain number of people every year to keep the population at an even keel. And, that's their ethical solution to how long should a human life be. But as you read those books, of course, you discover that, the ethics are all screwed up. because the moment humans begin determining their own lifetime, they begin determining the parameters of their stay here on Earth, then we open the door to all sorts of horrible corruption.
Well, and it's interesting.
Death is the great equalizer. And if you take that out of the thing, sorry.
I was just going to say, then you could also say that it could be reserved for great minds like Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
Like, I think if anybody deserved a restart with a new body, I think Stephen Hawking deserved that.
Yeah.
He was he was the greatest mind of our generation. He was a modern Einstein, and he made amazing scientific breakthroughs. And honestly, if the technology was available that he could transfer mind into a new body, I think we'd be a fool not to offer it to him to further humanity.
And we've gotten onto this all ethical conversation, but there's a story that I've been working on. I'll tell the tidbits of it. It's an old vampire. Now, okay, vampires are old, but this vampire is surviving in a modern world, not because he is Lord and Master, but because he has taken the role of being a servant for a family that knows that he's a vampire. They're not vampires. They go through generation after generation after generation, and he continues to be the servant. The whole point of this story is that it's this servant who's having to learn having to exist in a modern world, and he hates it. He prefers horses. Cars don't have an intellect, and even though we're getting to self-driving cars, he's just like, I don't understand. Is it? Yes, but we need you to be, as a servant, we need you to also be a driver. It's like, oh, I hate this, and modern technology and social media is like, I don't want to understand. I liked the world that I was at. And one of the things that we do as we age is we become very comfortable with the things that were in our youth. And I say youth, I say in our 20s and our teens, 20s, and 30s, that this is the time that we're really beginning to cement, this is what we like. So when we get to our 50s and 60s and 70s, we begin to more rebel, not always, but we begin to rebel about the new. So now let's take this into okay, we've got this ability to transfer our life. Stephen Hawking is a great example. For 10 years, for 15, for 20 years, we may get this, we get to explore the things. But when does that transferring the community, the consciousness and become a curmudgeon? Wait a minute, you're not keeping up with the times. The things that I love that's happening with the 20 somethings or whatever generation that is now, the 20 somethings they're exploring social media in ways that I couldn't even conceive of 5 years ago. And so I'm depending on their intellect, on their new view of the world, coming from a software programming thing. Again, there's things that are happening in the programming world. There's things that I'm learning as a software programmer now that 20 years ago, I was like, this concept didn't even exist. At least not in the world where I was programming. And so it's to be a current programmer, I am constantly having to learn and relearn. And the things that people are coming up with are because they're the younger generation that is going, oh, well, we just take all of the stuff that you've been doing as a matter of course, but look, you could do this new thing. Whereas someone who has been doing it for years and years and years is kind of set in their ways. I don't know.
I have the perfect example for you. One of the biggest contentions that I have with my kids is every time we go to the store, they want a new toy. Every single time. So after months and months of research and finding the right one, I finally talked my wife into letting me buying a 3D printer. Because now, instead of every time we go to the store to buy a new toy, my kids can literally sit down with me and design and build their own toys and watch them come to life and see that satisfaction in it. Like, I am excited for this new piece of technology that I get to play with. I'm excited for this type of stuff. And I have a 14-year-old, and you were talking about how they're exploring social media. Do you know how scary that is?
Yes.
I'm in social media, and I'm like, this whole podcast, my podcast, the only reason it's any kind of success that I have one listener that is not somebody I interviewed. That is my dream of success. But if I have one person that listens to this going, man, I can't wait for his new episode. I can't wait to see who he talks to. It scares me to know that person, I don't know who they are at all. And the only reason they found me was because of social media. And whatever we put out on social media is there permanently, whether we delete it or not. It's somewhere permanently. And that scares me because I've put pictures of my kids on social media since they were born. Yeah. Like, literally the second they were born, there's a picture of them on the internet.
Yeah.
I can delete all of those and it's still there.
I'm going to tell you, James, I think the thing that would be most fascinating for me, and I hope for you too, is in 20 years, what your 14-year-old imagines as a possibility because you've exposed them to 3D printing and the world of being ASICs. So you've exposed them to, hey, imagine you went to the store, you saw that, now let's come home, let's reimagine it in what you can do with the 3D printing. You're going, I saw an object, I want to replace the object. Your 14-year-old is doing that, but is also beginning to explore what are all the other possibilities. What does this mean in an esoteric sense? Things that you won't conceive of. And I'm not trying to do this as a put down. It's just,
oh no, I'm excited.
Right. Oh no, absolutely. That's how the world explodes, because these people are coming and going, oh yeah, I see this, but I'm exploring it in a whole new way. Because I learned the technology at a time that my mind was able to absorb it internally, not consciously rote. And by virtue of that, it opens up so many more opportunities. That for me is the reason that we always need a new generation.
Yeah. And just the one thing I hated about the Jurassic Park movies is I hated when Malcolm said, you're not a real scientist. You're just standing on the shoulders of people that did the legwork before. And that pissed me off because I was like, dude, there's no advancement without looking at somebody else's work and taking it in a new direction.
Shouldn't that be the exact definition of what science is?
Yes, because somebody else did that legwork, so you didn't have to for you to make this advancement.
Yeah, and I think that's a writer's fault, not, I think the writer didn't, he was thinking of it from a literature standpoint and a great line to be an insult rather than from a truth standpoint.
Innovators in everything. I say this as a composer. There isn't a composer today that isn't composing based on people before. Bach, who, we're talking 1700, but all those years ago, what made Bach amazing was that Bach took what was already established and then did it so incredibly well that he ended up creating something new. Mozart's the same, Beethoven's the same. The list goes on. Again, I'm talking music, but it's always going, this person built something because they learned the existing so well. So science...
And that actually is an interesting dichotomy. One of my favorite philosophers is Hume. And Hume is Scottish, which is its own weight of attitude and things. But one of my favorite stories of Hume, he's at a dinner party. And they are speaking of, and at this time, the physical sciences and philosophy were all considered one. Okay, so you would have a medical doctor and an inventor and a electrical engineer or a physical engineer all together with a philosopher, and they would all consider themselves peers in the same realm. And so he's at a big dinner in Edinburgh where a whole bunch of the smartest men of their various things are together, and they're speaking of the theory of gravity and how easy it is to prove gravity. And they were talking about the ease of proving theories versus not proving. And the engineer is taking an apple and he's throwing it up in the air. And it comes down, and he throws it up, and it comes down, and he throws up, and he comes down, and he says, this proves gravity. And Hume says it proves nothing. And they went, no, it proves gravity. And he says, no, it proves that gravity did exist. You threw it up, it did come down, therefore gravity was acting upon it at that moment. Prove that it will exist. And of course, no one could prove that it will happen every single time. They could only prove that it did happen retroactively in the time before, but the future could not be proved. And at that moment, like a whole bunch of the greatest minds of a generation were just completely exploded and at sea. And when you read medical journals of the time, and when you read the personal biographies of these men, that there was this period of, oh, fuck. Nothing's guaranteed. Nothing's going to work the way we want it to. Nothing. And this absolute panic, because the absolute certainty that they had built, that they knew exactly how the world worked, was shown to only be a retroactive thing. You can only be sure how it has worked. Now, that has led to so many modern sciences. That moment of atomic explosion to the way that we formed thought changed everything. It changed the way we view literature. It changed the way we view science.
We have quantum physics because
of that moment.
We went and said, actually, we have this proof that sometimes things don't happen the way we want to. So there is this fuzzy period of this law always works in this instance, but it doesn't work in that instance. So why doesn't it work in that instance? And we have this whole new mathematical, philosophical, scientific realm of going, this is the other side of the coin.
So in a very real way, we owe space travel to Hume being an ass at a dinner with a bunch of other self-satisfied men. And so sometimes we build on the shoulders of giants, and sometimes we knock the legs out from underneath them to force our brains to do the elastic thing they do and create new worlds.
Yeah. So I just thought of something. You said way back in the beginning of the interview that you looked up evil scientists or mad women scientists, and they always came out evil. You should check out Dr. Afra.
I was going to say 9 times out of 10 they came out. Yeah, Dr. Afra.
I just thought of her mostly because I looked over and seen Star Wars dice. She's a scientist in the Star Wars universe, so definitely check out her comics. She's a great scientist that worked for Darth Vader for a time. So what's next for Eddie and Chip? Like, I know you guys were teasing a podcast called Anniversaries.
We do want to get our anniversaries going. Anniversary is a personal podcast that will explore. We have kind of a very strange love story. We were high school sweethearts, and got pregnant in our first 6 months of knowing each other and married and made a success of it. And that makes it kind of its own weird world. But also, we've traveled all over the world. We've been, our lives have had very divergent paths. And so there's just a lot of things in there. So that one we're hoping to share with you all through Anniversaries. We had, with COVID, of course, we had this huge disruption and a horrible move last year. And then we've discovered, and my apologies to any of your listeners if you've heard, our background radiation noise in this new apartment is not great. We're in downtown LA. Ooh. And it can be very noisy. And so we've had to spend some time saving up money to invest in a proper soundproofing booth in this home. The curtains and closet that we had wasn't enough to isolate DTLA. So we've been saving our money to do that, and hopefully we can get Anniversaries out this year. But then also we're helping on the Super Secret Friends project, which will be coming out this fall. And then I have something very new cooked up that we're pitching to Audible. And if this happens, it will be a multi-writer thing. I'm going to need a whole bunch of other writers to come on aboard and submit episodes. And I want to write something in the way that they wrote the old Love Boat. The way the Love Boat worked was they had a head writer's room that was in charge of the stories that happened with the crew. And then they would bring on guest writers that would write the portions of the guests that had come on the ship. And then they had a third set of writers whose job was to meld the two stories together. The main story of the crew, and then the story of the passengers, and then the third set of writers melded them together each week. And so it was this revolving set of writers. And I've always been very, very fascinated with how that writer's room worked. So I have an idea where I can set a podcast with a writer's room that works the same. And so that's something that I'm working on setting up, and hopefully we'll have an announcement, but by the end of this year of going forward with that. And if Audible signs on for it, there'll be money in it, which is great for all of us.
That is great. Yeah. Okay, so where can people find you?
Well, our website still does, sageandsavant.com. It still has all of the information from the podcast. It has all the podcasts that are there. And
of course, there's still 3 more books to come out in the book series.
Right.
But on Twitter, it's easiest to find us by our names. I'm at Eddie Louise.
I'm at Chip Michael. And then at Sage and Savant is still there. We're on all the podcasting. So Podchaser, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play. Google Play isn't existing anymore, but
and if you want to shoot us an email, it's our first name plus at Sage and Savant. So Eddie at Sage and Savant or Chip at Sage and Savant.
Yeah.
So
well, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast and let me pick your brains and throw my crazy conspiracy theories at you.
I'll be back in contact after the book publishes.
I will call you after the audiobook comes out and I spend 12 hours a night listening to it. That I work 12-hour nights, and I have 12 hours to turn my brain off and listen to podcasts. So I blow through series in a day or two.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get through a lot of podcasts. So I am currently subscribed. I'm currently subscribed to over 1,000. So
wow.
Yeah, I am and I have this thing where I'll let bank fill, and then I'll binge listen to them all, and then come back to it in a year. So I thank you again for letting me pick your guys' brain, and let's give us a view of behind the scenes and everything. And if there's anybody that you guys think should come onto the show, definitely reach out to me. I'm at CreatorZAnon on Twitter, on TikTok. You can find me at CreatorZAnon@gmail.com. And again, thank you for our special guests. And until next time.
Awesome.
Thank you,
wonderful.
James.
Thank you, James.
Yep. And guys, you too. Until next time, stay creative.